for you is that you live a happy life.
I see.
My God, that's all I can say. I think we just witnessed what was probably the greatest story in all of Wuthering Waves. It was nearly just perfect. Aemeth was already the most hotly anticipated and alluded to character of all the ones that have been revealed in Lahairoi, and a story in 3.1 really just seals that even further. I've been really excited for Aemeth even before the story, because of the wealth of symbolism and references that I already knew was coming and even looked into prior to release. But now that she is out and we have her goddamn amazing story and character lore, I can say that she definitely does not disappoint in regards to all these links to pop culture, religion, literature, even a little bit of music and other things that come together to form a character that is so much deeper than just the random everyday student that she appears to be on the surface. So if you're interested in understanding what inspires the lore and design language of Aemeth beyond just her story, visuals, and gameplay, let's get started. As always, there will be spoilers for the 3.1 story, so I'd recommend playing that before coming to watch this video. I mean, why would you not play it? It's so good anyway. Aemeth has probably one of the, if not the most religiously charged names beside Phoebe in the entire game. Considering that the name Lahairoi, which we've made entire videos dissecting, as coming from the Old Testament, Aemeth, which comes from the three-letter Hebrew word Aemeth or Emeth, is a word with a very peculiar meaning. Mentioned a lot within the Bible and even more so within Jewish material like Kabbalistic literature, Aemeth can be kind of summarized as meaning a divine truth. While in modern times, we have an understanding of truth that originates from classical philosophy and is binary, where something is either true or false. The Jewish conception of truth with Aemeth is something that is related to God and following their teachings. It is a very powerful word, being composed of the first, middle, and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which allows it to represent a divine truth and a totality. And this is very important in one particular facet to Aemeth, because Aemeth, as a concept, is deeply connected to golems. It may come as a surprise if you haven't watched my previous video that golems come from the Bible and Jewish legends at all. After all, what we understand as a golem in modern times comes a lot from fantasy and pop culture. However, the first mention of a golem actually appears in the Bible in Psalm 139:16, where the Hebrew word golmi is often translated as unfinished or unformed substance. Within Jewish legend, golems are simply any kind of inanimate material, whether that is mud, clay, or anything else, given a form of sentience. The key importance to make here, however, is that in order to turn that material into a golem, a person has to carve a specific word into the golem's head, being Aemeth. By inscribing God's truth into clay or whatnot, you can effectively breathe life into a golem. Additionally, by erasing the first letter, Aleph, which is the very first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, you can turn this into the word Emeth, which means death. The key takeaway here, of course, is that the word Aemeth is in essence the key or soul of the golem. Without the truth of God, a golem is nothing but a lump of clay, of inanimate matter. And if you think about it, there is a massive golem in Lahairoi, being the Exostrider. Without Aemeth as an activation key, as a soul of the machine, then the Exostrider can't wake up from its slumber. One of the fascinating things that we learned in the story is that the Exostrider is a mass-produced robot that is traveling through space, carrying sentinels like Joe and Imperator to protect the world of Solaris free. The Exostrider isn't actually even that powerful. However, It's only with Aemeth's resonance, her power, that a robotic delivery machine can gain the amount of power that is needed to seal a Frenodian that has destroyed several civilizations before coming to Solaris. That's why within the 3.1 story, Sigilum is desperately trying to capture Aemeth and merge her with the Exostrider, because without her it simply cannot function. The Exostrider, relative to Sentinels, is actually nothing special, just like how Aemeth was just an ordinary schoolgirl who wanted to live a carefree life. However, when a lump of machinery combines with the faith and the truth of God, then they can stop even an ontological calamity, the Frenodian, from erasing the world as we know it. On the topic of Sigilum, the real primary antagonist for this patch, we learn throughout the story that they are a manifestation of Aemeth's thoughts and longing, charged through Rover's frequency and finally corrupted by the Frenodian. Now, Sigilum is something that I've been theorizing on for a long time, and I got my suspicions confirmed in the 3.1 livestream. Essentially, Sigilum and Aemeth together are both a reference to a Christian legend spoken of in magical grimoires, the Sigilum di Aemeth, otherwise known as a combination of Latin and Hebrew as the seal of divine truth. It was a magical circle, inscribed with the name of God and all of his angels, that gave a magician the power to possess the spirit of God, becoming essentially God itself. This is why throughout the story, Sigilum has referred to Aemeth as the control panel or the piloting control, because it is only with her and the core that the Exostrider, being the de facto god of Lahairoi, can be awoken. In fact, in a cutscene in the story, Aemeth's alternate mech form is preceded by transformation into a seraph, or in other words, a biblically accurate angel, which is something that is furthered by the fact that her resonance skill that allows her to transform is called Seraphic Duo, a further reference to the Sigilum di Aemeth, which requires all the names of God's angels in order to function. In addition to this, if you combine the first 3 letters of the Hebrew words for seal of truth, you will actually get the word for Aemeth, as we said so previously. Even further, the final finisher of Aemeth's moveset, which summons an illusion of the Exostrider, is a very obvious reference to Sigilum di Aemeth as well. Aemeth, as the activation key of the Exostrider, is metaphorically able to possess the spirits of God. Even though her control of the giant mech is not perfect by any means, we already saw both within the 3.1 story quest, when Rover is being chased by Sigilum, as well as within the short cinematic Salvation, that Aemeth is able to control the Exostrider for short periods if she overclocks, essentially controlling God at immense cost to herself. As such, the Sigilum di Aemeth makes sense here. Sigilum is like a magician, someone who is created from the desperation of wanting to go home, while Aemeth, which we discussed before, is like the divine truth, the chosen of God, and is a seraph, the angel, the magic that allows this god possession, shall we call it, to even be possible. To preface, for the understanding of how Norse mythology underpins the world of Lahairoi, I heavily recommend watching some of my theory videos I made before the patch. While they were educated guesses, a lot of what I theorized ended up being true, and they do go into Norse mythology extensively. While the scientific space trek collective, Lahairoi and even Aemeth herself is very inspired by the canon of Abrahamic religions, the Royan understanding is very heavily inspired by Norse mythology, which naturally means that both the Exostrider and the Frenodian have analogues to Baldur, the son of Odin and Frigg, as well as Hvedrungr, another name for Loki, the trickster god that begins the end of the world. As Aemeth is an Exostrider resonator, it's naturally also very important to talk about Norse mythology that has inspired her design language. The Exostrider, known to Royans as Baldur, is named after the real Baldur in Norse legend, who was the god of light whose death triggers the beginning of the end of the world, being Ragnarok. Besides this, we also have Hvedrungr, the Frenodian, as well as the Exostrider and Aemeth's mortal enemy. Hvedrungr is another name for Loki, the trickster god who indirectly kills Baldur to begin Ragnarok. In essence, now that we know that Aemeth time traveled back thousands of years to prevent the death of the Exostrider and steal the Frenodian Aleph I behind the Strider Gate, one interpretation you can have is that Aemeth's sacrifice at the end of the 3.1 story is essentially her preventing Ragnarok from happening. However, beyond this, one of the massive lore drops we've got in 3.1 is the actual nature of the Frenodian Aleph I, which is a higher dimensional being composed of void space, a void where everything exists at once, where space and time are laws that are not obeyed. Aemeth described this place as a kaleidoscope, where everything is warped, where all possibilities of cause and effect exist. As we hypothesized prior, this is very similar to the chaos dimension described in Juno's story, which is a reference to Greek chaos, a void at the beginning of the world from which all existence emerges from. We also further guess that the void of Aleph I, in regards to Norse mythology, is linked to the concept of Ginungagap, the black void which, similarly to Greek chaos, all existence comes from. However, Ginungagap is a little bit different from its Greek version, because in addition to being a void of nothing from which everything emerges from, Ginungagap also has the added ability to collapse existence back into itself, which it is said to do after Ragnarok, the prophesied end of the world in Norse mythology. This is very obviously a parallel to Frenodian's power of existence erasure, something that's only basically proven when you realize that the area of the map where Aemeth reveals this information, as well as also where you dive into in order to stop Aemeth from sacrificing herself into the void space, is called Ginnungagap. One of the things I think makes Aemeth such a likable character is that she is still a child at heart. She makes mistakes and keeps on assuming what is best for other people and the world. She is a quintessential adolescent anti-heroine, something that is really emphasized through the schoolgirl component of her character. Many resonators in Wuthering Waves have particular works of literature and culture that centers their characterization and design. For example, Brand is very heavily based on Sebastian Brandt's Das Narrenschiff, Galbrenner by Dante's Inferno, Frulova by Dante's Purgatorio, Cartafia by Cervantes' Don Quixote, amongst many, many others. As such, it may not come as a surprise that Aemeth's characterization is also based on a particular book, but what might come as a shock to you is that it is a novel that is completely obscure, published in 2017 and basically known by nobody. Yet, so much of her design language and personality has been inspired by this work of fiction. During the 3.1 story, when you attend Aemeth's fan meeting to conclude the schoolgirl side of her story, shall we call it, you will get an achievement called Dear Giovanni. This is a reference to the stream of consciousness novel Dear Giovanni, Is It Different for Girls? By Annie Brown, which tells the story of a 20-year-old girl who loves music and is trying to become a concert performer, navigating the troubles and the chaos of adolescence. The story is framed around diary conversations in italics with the main character's dead friend, Giovanni, hence the title of the book. In these entries, the unnamed protagonist keeps talking to Giovanni as if they were right next to them, as if they were still alive. This has been very well paralleled with Aemeth in a very interesting way, in that she is the dead friend trying to talk and interact with people that can no longer see her, injecting herself into situations as if she was still there. The protagonist of Annie Brown's book, an unnamed teenager wandering London and New York, narrates her life almost like a fever dream, which you can tell after reading 5 pages. I'm gonna be real, this is not an easy book to read. kind of reminds me a little bit of Finnegan's Wake. Maybe Finnegan's Wake on training wheels, but it's a pretty tough nut to crack, I'm gonna be real. She metaphorically characterizes her entire life as a road trip, a hectic journey of growing up. It is perhaps unsurprising then that Aemeth does the same thing, referring to her life as a road trip several times in the story. Rover had been gone for so long, and the things she wanted to share kept piled up, waiting. And if none of that felt right, she could always draw this whole road trip, just like old times.
Like traveling with a crew, seeing the sights, stumbling into trouble, then going your separate ways. Like a classic road trip movie, you know? That's right! Guess our little road trip movie's come to an end. Time to head back to Star Torch Academy. Together!
The protagonist of Annie Brown's book also constantly makes commentary about the stars in the universe. Within the first few pages, she talks about black holes, and throughout the book, she makes constant mention of things that seem oddly relevant to Aemeth's characterization. Let me give you an example. Atoms, remote from normal consciousness, coalesced on another plane, are earthed in a parallel universe on the wrong side of the road. This chaotic imagery is similar to Aemeth's own life of adolescence, which is in itself a coming-of-age story full of chaotic moments and resulting in an eventual sacrifice, on the wrong side of the road from Rover's own fate, perhaps. In fact, I find it almost funny that in Annie Brown's book, the protagonist in one scene reads the novel Gone with the Wind, which in itself is a story about a teenage girl growing up during a time of chaos. It is something which I find strangely similar, just like how despite the hectic narration of the book, the one constant in the protagonist's life is music. Everything can change, but music always stays as a constant. For example, she says, anyone who has a job of any kind makes, sells, listens to, dresses for, or is connected to sound. As you can probably imagine, this also links quite nicely to both Aemeth's obsession with singing and music. If you still aren't convinced, one of the letters to Giovanni in the book literally talks about the despair of winter when it should have been spring, a central theme within Aemeth's story that utilizes a lot of references to suffering of winter in order to assure the spring of Lahairoi, which is expressed both excessively within her songs, the symbolism of snowflakes used for promotional material, as well as her own story, where pain and sacrifice is symbolically alluded to as the clutch of winter, while the stability and future of Lahairoi that is born out of her sacrifice at the end of the 3.1 story is seen as a spring that comes out of winter. I find it oddly similar that the Dear Giovanni letter that I was talking about just now, where the narrator is trapped in a room watching the snow fall, is even basically the same as the final line of the last of Aemeth's character stories, Every Unspoken Word. The room fell into silence. Outside, snow drifted down without a sound, blanketing the world in white as it waited for spring. Besides the motif of snow as a symbol of inevitable death that we discussed in the previous chapter with Dear Giovanni, the other major motif of Aemeth's story is inevitably stars, which actually is very similar to Monya in a sense, if you want to watch that video. Similar to Monya, Aemeth seems to also reference the language of Carl Sagan, a famous American astronomer within a resonance chain whose fifth node, Voyage to the Astral Shore, is very similar, like Monya's sixth node, to the far shores of the cosmic stars, as both references to the first episode of Carl Sagan's TV series Cosmos, called The Shores of the Cosmic Ocean, where he compares mankind's yearning for the stars as a journey into a massive ocean, with Earth being a small shore, a small home, amidst the enormous expanse of the galaxy. Aemeth makes further reference to this idea in her song, Voyaging Stars Farewell, where she says, "Those who trace starlight on their lonely roads will find their destinations in the cosmos." This is particularly poignant as we now know that Aemeth is all alone amongst the stars after a sacrifice to seal the left one past the Strider Gate. As she says, "It is a song for a soul bound to soar to the very edge of the starry ocean." As such, it finally makes sense why her intro skill, which should be the very beginning of her rotation, speaks of leaving, being called Overture of Departure, meaning that her journey begins with leaving Rover. Her forte circuit, to sculpt the silence, is perhaps also emblematic of her fate of eternal loneliness. And Aemeth, knowing this, has accepted it. Within her Midnight podcast, she characterizes Rover as a star that guides her throughout her life. Her signature weapon, the ever-bright Polestar, is a reference to this too, being a link to the real star of Polaris, otherwise known as the North Star due to how close it is to the North Pole. Remember how Lahairoi became the new magnetic pole of the world after the Lamet started? In addition to this, Polaris is a navigation aid, a star that people can look at to find themselves in the night sky, similar to how Rover is a beacon in Aemeth's life. I think the most touching reference of all, however, in the subject of stars, is Aemeth's fifth character story, Every Unspoken Word. It describes Aemeth right before she makes a sacrifice at the end of the 3.1 story, regretting that she can't speak to Rover again. She wants to leave a final message, a final speech to her family, contemplating hard on what the last line is going to be. Eventually, she ends with, "I know if I look up, that star will always find me."
私、知ってるよ。私がどこにいても、あなたはずっとそばにいてくれる。そして顔を上げれば、あの星はいつだって私を見つけてくれる。
Another big symbolic motif of Aemeth's character and design, because we clearly cannot get enough of them, are paper planes. Paper planes are an interesting piece of symbolism because they can represent so many different things. Within literature and culture, paper planes are often symbolic of childhood and innocence, which a young Aemeth definitely emblemizes. However, Aemeth's story and design also takes on an alternate, more mature understanding. As she says within her song, Paper Planes, though fate promises her a fall like a paper plane, she raises a torch still, its light reaching into the universe. As such, paper planes, which symbolize childhood and hope, also have a dark side to them. Whenever they are thrown, they must inevitably fall. This parallels the symbolism of snow that we discussed prior, which also must inevitably melt. In essence, paper planes can evoke feelings of hope and freedom, of soaring, but like Icarus who reached for the sun, they must also fall. We've seen this exact same message within the story of Wuthering Waves already, when Chikona argued with Cristoforo and said that the wonder of flying is worth the eventual pain of falling. I find it particularly interesting that in the flashback you have within Rover and Aemeth's cabin when she was a kid, a young Aemeth wanted Rover to teach her how to fold planes, as her paper planes always fell short, but Rover's always flew so far. In line with what we just talked about, this may be a sad reference to Aemeth's own fate, one where she has to sacrifice herself early to save the world, like a paper plane who falls short, while Rover must keep flying alone on their mission, like a paper plane who flies far. When Rover explores Aemeth's internal mindscape, she tells Rover about a ridiculous story of a black cat with golden eyes, who saves the world but has shown no gratitude. The black cat stuck in a box, a metaphor for Rover, is a reference to the infamous Schrodinger's cat, which is a scientific thought experiment in quantum superposition that explains that if a cat is left in a box and it cannot be observed, then it must both be in a state of death and life simultaneously. While Aemeth's story doesn't quote Schrodinger's experiment word for word, it has very importantly confirmed an overarching metaphor within the Wuthering Vegvisir story, that Rover is Schrodinger's black cat. For example, Aemeth's story about the cat that saves the world was foreshadowed all the way back in 1.0, where a daily mission was literally called Save the World, Save the Cat. Additionally, within Encore's fairy tale Sonorosphere, Rover is portrayed as a black cat, alongside black cats also appearing several times within the Somnoia. While I can't make definitive connections now, I think that Aemeth's, well, basically confirmation that Rover is linked quite heavily to Schrodinger's cat may be a link to their fundamental status of being. Could Rover also rise above natural human existence in our dimensions in order to save Aemeth in a doom loop of saving Lahairoi? That's something we're just going to have to wait and see about, as we get more and more details about Rover and their past in future stories. As always, thank you very much for watching. The 3.1 story was just amazing, and I've been in a bit of an overdrive just pumping out my thoughts about this update in video form. So if you've learned something or enjoyed this analysis on Aemeth, I'd appreciate if you like and subscribe, or even support me with a donation or perhaps becoming a channel member. I'll be making more videos about the story reveals within 3.1 of course, so hope you all have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you in the next video.